Mr. Mancini. Uh, We're going to have several rounds of questioning, I hope 7 minutes each. I welcome my colleagues being here. We'll try to stick to 7 minutes so everybody can get a chance. Let me ask you, Mr. Fowler, have you had a chance to review our report? It was provided to you earlier.
Senator, yes, I have had a chance to make myself familiar.
Okay. Any of these numbers, and I'm directing your attention particularly to page 28, figure 6, if you want to have a look at a copy that's been provided to you. Any of those numbers look wrong? I'm assuming they don't,
Chairman,
because
did you
they
say,
came from Zelle.
Chairman, excuse me, did you say 28, figure 6?
Page 28. While you're looking, I'll just say to you that they describe in greater detail what I mentioned earlier, namely that only 38% of the claims made for unauthorized losses, which is down from 62% in 2019, have been reimbursed, although unauthorized claims are required to be reimbursed under current law, the Electronic Funds Transfer Act. Do you dispute the numbers that are in figure 6?
Mr. Chairman, as you know, financial institutions on the Zelle network are required to comply with Reg E. So,
well, these numbers are correct, yes or no?
this is bank data. So
It's correct. Yes. Yes is a good way to answer if you have no disagreement.
Senator, it's bank information. It's not Zelle network released.
Okay. And I gather you don't dispute either that of the $372 million in disputed fraud and scam transactions on Zelle at Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, Chase, and Wells Fargo alone, more than $270 million were not returned to consumers who lost those funds, correct?
Again, Mr. Chairman, these are bank data to confirm. The important part here, I think, is that all banks are required to comply with Regulation E. As you know, they have the policies and procedures to do those.
Why is the rate of reimbursement only 38%?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not in a position to comment on that.
So you don't dispute that it's correct, but you have no explanation.
Senator, Mr. Chairman, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, the financial institutions that are on the Zelle platform are required to comply with Regulation E.
But they're not doing it.
And they're supervised to do so as regulated banks.
Well, that number, which apparently you don't dispute, indicates they are not complying with the current law, Regulation E, Electronic Funds Transfer Act.
Mr. Chairman, my role is to provide oversight of the Zelle network and the operating rules and ensure that participating banks do the same.
In an interview in March, you said, and I quote, "There is a point where the conversation needs to move beyond reimbursement and stay incredibly focused on education, public policy, and law enforcement. And we try to balance our energy across all of those categories." Evidently, reimbursement is not one of your priorities.
Mr. Chairman, I would stand by those statements. I think that across 120 million users, where 99.9+% of the time there is no fraud or scam involved in the transaction, and for that less than 0.1, we have industry-leading reimbursement programs in place. My point in that statement and my point today would be that more energy for all of us needs to shift to the criminals that are perpetrating the crime.
None of your testimony to all of the witnesses disputes numbers in this report. Do any of you have alternative numbers that you think are more accurate than the ones in this report? I gather from silence that you would agree that these numbers are accurate. They come from the banks, as Mr. Fowler indicated, and they are correct. So my question to you, Ms. Felcher, is what's the explanation for only 38% reimbursement of a category? Remember, we're talking here about unauthorized losses, which I think you call fraud, as opposed to scams where there is some kind of consent or approval. But in that category, there's a legal requirement that they be reimbursed. What's the explanation for only 38%?
Mr. Chairman, I cannot speak to the aggregated data. I can only speak to Chase data.
What is the Chase data?
The information that we provided to the committee is based on how the customer initially describes what happened on their initial call to us. And when we complete our investigation, we may determine that the transaction was actually authorized.
So you're saying, what is the data then for Chase, the equivalent of the 38% number?
The data that we provide, and I don't have that number right in front of me, but
You don't have the data for reimbursements of authorized or unauthorized claims?
Unauthorized, I think your question, Mr. Chairman, was about unauthorized transactions, and we do reimburse 100% of all unauthorized transactions. The data that we provided to the subcommittee is based on how that claim was classified upon the initial call that we had with the customer. As we complete our investigation and we determine that the transaction may in fact have been authorized, and that is why you would see a different number.
So you shift them from unauthorized to authorized?
We do an investigation to determine whether the transaction was authorized or unauthorized.
In every single one of those claims, you do an investigation?
We investigate all claims.
And what is the nature of that investigation?
We use a variety of tools to determine that case of whether the customer actually made that transaction or not.
I think a representative of J.P. Morgan Chase said, or was quoted this morning as saying, quote, "It is disappointing that this subcommittee spent a year investigating one of the safest payment platforms only to make partisan recommendations that ignore the underlying problem, the criminals." Do you agree with that statement?
I believe that it is important that we look at the root cause of the problem, which is the criminal activity. We have criminals out there that are taking advantage of Americans, and they are taking advantage of their money.
Have you read the recommendations?
I have not had an opportunity to fully
The recommendations deal with criminality and enforcement. Do you agree with the statement made by that J.P. Morgan Chase representatives that these are partisan recommendations that ignore the basis for the problem?
I believe that it's important that we look at the root cause of the problem and stop that so we can actually bring justice to the victims.
My time has expired. I'm going to come back to this topic. I'm going to go to the ranking member.
So again, I just want to